so we'll go ahead and get it started. My name is Carol Peters, and I am proud to serve as the president and CEO of United Way Next. I am so excited for today's presentation because I know that our guest speakers have really poured a lot of time and energy into the presentation, and I know you're going to get a lot of great, rich information from the session. As we mentioned, for those of you who just joined, we're putting our name and the local United Way or where you're calling in from today in the chat. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator, our volunteer faculty, Dan Dunne, and one of our very valued United Way Next members. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Carl. I'm Dan Dunne. I work with 4 United Ways, most recently with United Way of Central Alabama, where I spent 18 years as CEO and retired, and did some planned giving work for that United Way for about 5 years after I retired on a part-time basis. I had the good fortune of being able to start planned giving in Birmingham in 2001, and been able to see the terrific growth of the endowment at that United Way. And so it started very small, and they're hoping to be at 100 million in the next year or two. So just from little beginnings, we have developed it over the years. So I'm excited always about planned giving. And so thank you, Caitlin and Carl, for putting us together and bringing us together. And thank all of you from local United Ways who are participating. And a special thanks to Ed and Roma for their hard work in preparing this presentation. And certainly relationships with the Community Foundation in most of our communities that have foundations is significant and very important, because a lot of gifts come through the foundation to the local United Way. So I will just hand it over to Ed and then Roman, ask them to introduce themselves, and again thank them for this presentation.
Are we going to do, should we do a polling question now, or do you want to get into introductions?
Soon after the introductions.
Okay, well, my name is Ed John, and I'm a member of United Way Next, and have had over, I guess about 40 years of experience in nonprofit fundraising. I worked at 3 local United Ways in Salt Lake City and Denver and Charlotte. But most of my time was spent at United Way Worldwide, where I was the vice president of planned giving. I have quite a bit of experience working with community foundations, and have done some joint conferences with community foundations. Had a good relationship while in Charlotte with the community foundation there, and have worked closely with the Foundation for the Carolinas with United Way Next Endowment Fund. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'll now turn it over to Roma.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roma Bose. I worked with United Way Worldwide for 15 years. I had the privilege of working closely with Joyce, Wilbur, and with Ed, of course. And much of my work was focused on international development. However, for a period of time, I did serve the local United Way network as well. Soon after that, I joined World Food Program, and from there I went on to head a family foundation. And more recently, I am working as a consultant, and I also am connected with my local United Way. From Washington, D.C., I moved to Boise, Idaho. That's where I'm living right now, and have the good fortune of also being connected to my local community foundation over here. So all in all, 24 years of nonprofit experience. I'm also serving on United Way Next, and I'm helping multiple nonprofits set up their own planned giving and endowment funds. So shall we, Caitlin, over to you?
I think Ed probably will.
So there's going to be a couple poll questions, if you would mind answering those questions, and then we'll get started.
I think the first question is, how would you describe your relationship with your community foundation? Good, fair, poor, I don't know. So if you could take a minute and answer that, that would be great. And then we'll show the results in just a few seconds. Do we have any results, Caitlin?
We have a few more answers coming in.
Okay. I should have brought my banjo. I could have filled the time. Would definitely clear out the room.
I just want to say I'm so thrilled to see so many of my United Way friends online. It's so exciting to be with you and to be able to participate in this session.
Well, as we look at this, half of you say you have a good relationship. 42% say fair. We don't have any poor, but we do have 8 that don't know or they have no relationship. So that helps guide us as we go through this. I think there's another poll question. You want to take this one, Roma?
Have you placed any endowment funds in your community foundation? Let us know if you have, if you don't, and if you don't know.
And Roma, I'm equally glad to see some people that I know and have worked with in the past. So,
especially since we work from home most of the time, it's so good to be with people and to see their faces and feel a part of something important, you know. And this is critical work that we do. Awesome. So 33% say yes, that's great. And 58% say no. Okay. So there's a huge scope for improving that, and then don't know. So good to know who we have in the audience, and thank you for participating again. So why don't we just dive into the session and learn about what is it, how are we the same, and how are we different, and how can we work together with the community foundations. So for our agenda, we'll start with perspectives on United Way and community foundation relationships, and Ed is going to help lead us with that. And then we'll talk about the win-wins, similarities, differences, what are the win-win possibilities, and so on and so forth. Importantly, where United Way endowment funds are held, variance power, and Ed has been doing this for so many years. He will be able to explain to you what that means. And then things to consider when placing an endowment fund at a community foundation. And then potential obstacles that you should be aware of. We'll talk about that as well. And then how do we overcome those obstacles? So we have a full session to talk about this. And so over to you, Ed, if you would help us get started.
Okay, thanks, Roma. I really want to say a couple of things. We hope that we have been objective in presenting these presentation and making the slides, but in full disclosure, we are United Way alumni, and so we probably have the United Way perspective, but we're trying to be as objective as possible. But I wanted to stress, whatever we present here, one size doesn't fit all, and community foundation relationships vary by community. And my experience is relationships can change if there's a change in either the executive leadership or volunteer leadership. So it's somewhat fluid, but this is the overall perspective that we wanted to come in to this presentation with. So with that, Roma, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah. So let's see what are the commonalities and what are the differences. Caitlin, if you move us to the next slide. Okay, so to begin with, both United Way and community foundations are nonprofit organizations, right? Meaning that they operate for charitable or community-based purposes, and they are tax exempt under relevant laws. Secondly, both organizations are dedicated to supporting communities and improving the lives of people in those communities. They work towards addressing social issues, enhancing social services, and fostering positive change. Moreover, both community foundations and United Ways engage in fundraising activities, though they might be doing them differently, but they both engage in fundraising activities, and they rely on donations, grants, and endowment funds for community initiatives. Fourthly, they collaborate with nonprofit organizations. They address community, they work with nonprofit organizations in their communities that are addressing community needs. And they serve as a bridge between the donor and the recipient organization, ensuring that the funds are effectively and efficiently distributed. So that's another commonality. Philanthropy. Both organizations promote philanthropy and charitable giving. They encourage individuals, corporations, and foundations to contribute to social causes and invest in the betterment of their communities. They both do impact measurement, right? United Ways and community foundations emphasize the importance of measuring and evaluating the impact of their programs and initiatives. They both aim to ensure that resources are used effectively and efficiently and that positive outcomes are achieved. Both organizations actively engage with the community to understand their needs and develop strategies that align with those needs. Both organizations have a local focus. They work to improve specific community and geographic improvements in their communities and address the challenges that are faced by those communities. Volunteerism. Both organizations promote and facilitate volunteerism as a means of mobilizing community members. And then collaborative partnerships. Both organizations collaborate with various stakeholders, including the government agencies, businesses, and other nonprofits, and community leaders to create a collective and coordinated approach to community development. So that way, in these many ways, both organizations are the same. So on the surface, you would say, yeah, they're both the same. But there are key differences between, and Caitlin, would you move us to the next slide? So there are key differences between our two organizations. And please know that you will have access to these slides afterwards, so you will be able to have this information handy. So mission and focus. So United Way's primary mission is to mobilize resources and community support to address pressing social issues in their specific geographic areas. And we focus on programs offered by partner nonprofit organizations. We collaborate with local agencies and businesses and volunteers to address our community needs, right? Which are primarily focused on education, income, and health, as we all know. Community Foundation, however, primarily focuses on building permanent endowments to support long-term philanthropic efforts within their geographic region. Their mission is to enhance the quality of life of community by providing grants, scholarships, etc. And they cover many different aspects, including education, arts and culture, health, environment, social services, etc. So community foundations aim to create sustainable solutions and leave a lasting impact on their communities. So this way, both our mission and focus vary with each other. Funding model is also different. Slide 2. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So United Way is known for conducting annual fundraising campaigns that gather donations from individuals, corporations, and other sources, as we know. And the funds that are raised are then distributed to partner agencies and programs to address the community needs. And in the case of community foundations, they manage endowment funds. So basically, they're raising money to create endowments, and they make grants. In fact, their donors many times are making decisions about investments in the local communities. So the funds are invested and generated, and the generated income is used to provide grants and scholarships. So many times these endowment funds, and mostly endowment funds, are invested, and the interest gained from those endowments is spent on the community. And many times donors themselves also make decisions, like I said earlier. Next slide is about organizational structure. So United Way operates on a single national or regional entity, or operates as a national or regional entity with local chapters, as we all know, and we are all affiliated organizations, right? And each chapter has its own degree of autonomy in determining their local program funding and priorities. Community Foundation, however, are independent organizations that operate at the local or regional level. They are governed by a board of directors or trustees who oversee the foundation's activities, including grant making and investment decisions. And then let's talk about community engagement. Next slide, please. So with regards to community engagement, United Way emphasizes the need and the value of community engagement and involvement. And we often conduct community assessment, needs assessments, as you would all of you would become conducting in your own community. And you identify most pressing issues, and then you collaborate with agencies to address those issues. Community Foundation, however, also engages with the community, but their approach is more focused on understanding the donor interest and community priorities to direct their grant making and endowment building efforts. So if you notice, the emphasis with the Community Foundation is on donor intent and donor interests. So whereas both organizations are committed to supporting their own communities, they vary through these different models and structures. So those are the key differences. And then if we move on to the next slide. So, so there are areas of collaboration. Ed, I think I'm supposed to keep going, right?
I think you're doing a great job, and you should.
Okay. So because I don't have the slide numbers in front of me, so, or they're very tiny, so I couldn't tell. Okay. So diverse experiences. So how do we come up with win-win? What is it in it for the community foundations to partner with United Ways, right? And how can we find those strategies where we can identify areas of common interest and areas of collaboration? So, whereas community foundations often have different areas of expertise, United Way is known for fundraising capabilities, right? And its ability to mobilize resources to support a wide range of social programs. On the other hand, community foundations are skilled in managing endowments. They're really good at doing that work, investing and managing endowments, and building long-term sustainable community funds for community projects. So by collaborating with them, we can leverage each other's strengths and then provide a more comprehensive approach to community development. So if I may, like I mentioned earlier at the start in my introduction, I now live in Boise, Idaho. I just want to emphasize how community foundations can be collaborative and supportive of United Ways. And a great example is that the community needs assessment study that was done, that has been done over the years, has been done in partnership between the United Way and the local community foundation. And they enjoy working with each other. So if anybody wants to learn more, I can talk about that separately. But what I'm trying to emphasize is that there are areas or opportunities to collaborate in many different ways with your local community foundation. So secondly, we're going to talk about enhanced funding opportunities. So when we partner with the community foundation, we can pool our resources together and address an issue. If there's a larger issue that needs to be addressed and you need multiple $1 million or a large size fund to be able to support that community issue, you can collaborate with them as a 50% partner or dollar for dollar partnership and address those needs. And so as a result, there's a greater impact and there's a more efficient allocation of resources. Moving on, then both organizations have deep community roots. Caitlin, if you would move us to the next slide. Both organizations have deep community roots, right? So there are strong connections with local communities. Both understand the unique needs and challenges in our own communities, right? And so by partnering with the Community Foundation, we can expand this localized knowledge and ensure that the initiatives are well targeted and relevant to the community specific requirements, which is another way of saying that that we can identify, because of our community roots, we know our people, we know the needs, and we know our donors. And so by collaborating, we can have multifold impact in our communities. We both have shared values and objectives, like we mentioned earlier. Our goals are the same. At the end, we want our communities to improve and thrive. And so, so this can become a win-win for both organizations. And then we talk about enhanced efficiency on the next slide. By partnering, we can avoid duplicating efforts, right? Which means it saves us resources, and the operation is efficient, and each of the two partners can take responsibility and hold each other accountable for the part of the work that they are taking on. And it allows for more resources. In fact, when donors see both organizations collaborating, they're more encouraged to fund such programs. And then advocacy and policy influence. I mean, that's a no-brainer. If we partner with the community foundations, it amplifies our voices, and we are able to advocate for important community issues at the local, regional, or even national levels. So a united front can have a more significant impact on policy changes and systemic improvements. So all in all, what we are saying is that that partnering with the community foundation enhances our collective ability to address community needs, to secure funding, and to make a lasting impact in our communities. So now, having gone over win-win strategies, we know that there are potential obstacles to building a collaborative relationships too, right? What are those obstacles? And I am on slide number 12, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So what are those obstacles? Oh, competition. And we know that really well, right? When we are fundraising, and we're both community focused, and our donors are from within the community, that it can appear, and many times it seems like a competition, like, okay, who gets the donor to fund them first, right? It can seem that way. And then, or not seem that way, but sometimes it's real. The competition is real. And then balancing priorities. Caitlin, I think we're behind. If you would move the slide forward.
Actually, Roma, I think this
Yes.
is where I'm supposed to jump in. So thank you. And I think, as Roma pointed out, there are many collaborative efforts outside of fundraising and money. But when money comes up, it becomes a little more different. And collaboration is a little more different. In fact, I have heard that when it comes to this, collaboration is defined as sometimes as an unnatural act between two unconsenting organizations. And it can be that way. So I want to take a look at, when we get involved in plan giving endowment, what may be some of the barriers. And the two biggest barriers are incorrect labeling of one another and a lack of transparency around variance power, and I would say fees, and perhaps some administrative issues. So let's move to the next slide. When I first started working with United Way of America about 30 years ago, annual campaigns were robust and community foundations were much fewer. And there was actually a concern on the part of community foundations that United Way might be encroaching on their business. And so there was a phrase that was used: United Way is the community's checking account, and the community foundation is the community's savings account. And why that might be a clever little, almost a bumper sticker phase, it doesn't adequately define the relationship. And I think it does injustice to the mission of both organizations. Plan giving, endowment development are methods, and they are methods that are used to support the missions of the respective organizations. And so when you look at this, particularly if you're talking to your volunteers or donors or the community foundation, I think there are three things to keep in mind. The first is, don't confuse a method with a mission. And I would strongly encourage you to really look at the mission of the community foundation and your mission, and make sure that you're focusing on that and not on the methods. The second is, no organization in the community has exclusive hold on annual fundraising, and no organization in the community has exclusive hold on endowments. And so both organizations are involved in annual fundraising, plan giving, and endowment development. And then the third thing I would stress is, if you have an endowment fund, I think it's really important to make sure you're clear about the purpose of that endowment as it relates to your mission. And although United Way's had many different purposes, I think in the end they come down to three things. They are able to stabilize your income, they're able to diversify your income, and through an effective plan giving program, they're able to grow your income, that all contribute to your mission. Let's look at how United Way endowment funds are held. And if we go to that next slide, approximately a third of the United Ways are holding their own endowment fund, either at the United Way, or some, and I think a couple of on the line, have actually created their own United Way Foundation. But for all intents and purposes, this is held by the United Way. A third put their total endowment fund at the Community Foundation, and 1/3 do a combination of both. So there is a diversity of how these endowment funds are held. If you are considering placing either your entire endowment fund or some of your endowment funds at the Community Foundation, there's several things that I think you should consider as we look at the next slide. The first is, who can best administer and invest your endowment fund? And for some, that might be the Community Foundation, and others it may not. Second, are the fees and the returns competitive? And I think it's important to do an analysis of how is the Community Foundation performed? Are their fees competitive? Third is sort of looking at the community. How would your collaboration impact the community? Is there a positive approach here, positive impact if you are collaborating? The next is, what are the wishes of the donors? Some donors may really like to have your endowment fund held at the Community Foundation. Some may not. So that's an evaluation. And then before I go through the last one, the other is, some United Ways, and this has happened with United Way Next, some community foundations provide matching money, so that if you put your endowment in the Community Foundation, they will match that. And so I think if you're considering it, you should look at that. But the biggest barrier, the biggest concern, is a concept called variance power. And tonight when you're at dinner and you're talking to your family or your friends, I think you'll be amazed how excited they'll be about the discussion of variance power. So if I can keep you awake for this last slide, we're going to talk about variance power, and we can move to that. To put this wording into perspective, or to summarize it, basically means that if you put endowment funds in the Community Foundation, they own it and they control it. You have the right to the income, which is called the beneficial income. But the community foundation owns these funds. And my experience has been that this, for United Ways who decide not to put funds in the community foundation, this is the biggest barrier of all. It's called variance power. They own it, they control it. You get the beneficial income coming out of it. Next slide. I think I will concluding here. I'm concluding here. No, I've got one more. But the obstacles to building a collaborative relationship. One might be a competition for funding, balance of priorities, governance and control, geographic scope. Some United Ways and community foundations have different geographies, communication, coordination, your funding restrictions, your flexibility, trust and relationship building is a big one, and competition for community engagement. But as I said before, the biggest barrier is the variance power and fees. And I think my last slide is the next one. And the obstacles to overcoming. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I think it just means trust and understanding and transparency. So with that said, I think we turn it over to Roma, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah. So we have one more poll question that we're going to post shortly. But for further questions, concerns, if you want more clarification, if you want more guidance on how to, for any and all types of questions that you may have, would you please write to Carol? You see her email address on the slide, and we will be at United Way Next. We will be more than happy to help you out with any and all of those questions. All right, today what we've done is just provided some basics. Once you've had a chance to mull over it and you have questions, please feel free to reach out. And so my friend Caitlin, are you going to put up the poll question? Let's see. Here we go. Do you share common donors with your community foundation? Yes, no, or I don't know. Yes, yeah, absolutely. 9% is no, and I don't know is 9%. So which shows us that there is room for us to be supportive and help you with where you want to be. Actually, all of these three questions that we posed reflect that there's a scope for improvement, for where we can add value to the work that you are doing. Any questions? You feel free to speak your question or put it in the chat box.
While we're waiting for questions, I want to thank you, Roma and Ed, for just a wonderful presentation. Great, meaty content for us to chew over and reflect on. And it will be available, I guess, online too, for us to just think about it more. But there's a lot in what you did for us to really talk about, think about. So we'll welcome your questions or comments or observations. The floor is open for you. I guess, is it Eve has her hand up, or?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. I'll just
I'm
Right.
curious. I have a question, and it's really for Christy because she put in the chat that in Madison they started their own foundation. So, Christy, would you share a little bit more about that? Because you mentioned the variance power, which I've never heard the variance power, but I love knowing that, so I can bring it to dinner tonight and we can giggle over it.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And I could lean on Ed because he was actually part of those conversations before I came on staff. So he knows a little bit about our foundation. But we had, like many of you, different estate gifts. And when those came through, the decision was to start a fund at our Madison Community Foundation. And that was in the mid 80s when actually the foundation was kind of dormant. So they were looking to build it up. We had some gifts, so we could be a partner in that. But years later, we had lead volunteers, including one who helped establish our Tocqueville Society. And his point was everything we do is volunteer led and driven. So why wouldn't our endowment funds be led by United Way volunteers who have United Way's mission at heart? So it went from there. And certainly in the community, there are still people who feel that, like that comment about whether it's the checking account or the savings account, right? That they were like, United Way should not have a foundation. But we have other donors who are not fans of the community foundation and are grateful that they can do their planning with us. So I just try to leverage it so that it's the best of both. And it is another form of diversification because their investment policies are different than what we do. And to be honest, probably 95% of our endowment funds are with our United Way Foundation, and then 5% at the Community Foundation. So it's certainly not what we promote, but it's an option for donors who want to invest there. And sometimes there are gifts that they can receive that our foundation, which is a supporting organization, can't. So it just gives people more opportunity. But I do, to be honest, often refer to them as our frenemy because we try to work well together. It's a small community, but there are certain times when I just have to shake my head. But also, to be honest, we just had our centennial and they were the presenting sponsor. So again, trying to share that, that we're in this space together and the donor is at the heart of it. And as you've all said, the community's betterment is what we're all doing. We just sometimes have to pause and remind ourselves of that. But it's been the best part of my job is working with our foundation and our volunteer board and our donors. So I'm grateful that we do have our foundation, and a shout out to Ed because I know he was in some of those early conversations just to keep us on track.
It's wonderful, Christy. Thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful.
I wanted to, as long as we're waiting, I want to reemphasize a couple of things. And it's occurred a couple of times in my history. If you're thinking about putting endowment funds, if you have funds and you're thinking about putting them in a community foundation, and you're comfortable with the variance power, and you're comfortable with their fees and their returns, I think you miss an opportunity not to also bring up the subject of would they match the money that you transfer over and put matching money into your endowment fund. So if you transfer 100,000, they match it by 100,000 or some other vehicle. That's a simple thing for them to do, in my opinion, because they're actually giving to themselves. They're holding those funds. And that occurred with the Foundation for the Carolinas when it was initially founded. And it was actually founded by United Way. And I think many community foundations have been founded by United Way. And then at United Way Next, it's happened twice. They matched when we first set up an endowment fund at the Foundation for the Carolinas. And then a couple of years ago, we did an endowment drive for Bob Bagan, who many of you may know. It's just a great United Way professional. And they matched that money. So we actually doubled our money. So those are opportunities to just don't blindly transfer the funds. Look at the things we talked about, but then you can also look at it as an opportunity to get matching funds from the community foundation.
Ed, may I ask a question?
Sure.
So my question is, then in the case that you just mentioned, if they would match the funds, etc., who makes the giving decision? Like who is then decides where to put them? Who has the upper hand, or who's the decision maker in terms of the utilization of the funds?
Well, most community foundations have a distribution policy, which I think you agree to when you put funds in there. And it's generally a percentage, a 3 or 5 year rolling average of the principal in the fund. In the case of the Foundation for the Carolinas, they do an X percentage of a rolling average, and they re-examine that percentage based on the earnings of the fund. But once that money comes out, it's up to the United Way to see how to use that. So generally it just comes to the United Way and they make the decision how to apply that distribution.
Okay, thank you.
In Birmingham, Alabama, when we faced the decision about whether we'd work with the foundation, we felt it was for good community relations that we put some couple of $1 million into the foundation to get started. And we knew the variance power, but we've never had a problem with it. But we realized in putting the money in that the foundation controlled it, and we were paying a fee for their management of it and so forth. So that was the kind of maybe minus in the relationship, but some of the great positives were that various community initiatives that United Way wanted to do, like in disaster assistance and so forth, that the foundation was there as a partner, wanted to invest. It was good for them as for PR and so forth. What I also realized is that the Community Foundation does not do our work. So our donors, our United Way donors, you've got to do your own work to get those gifts endowed and to grow that endowment. No one else will do it for you. They may hold people's money, but you've got to go out and do the asking your donors from the top down to endow their gift 25 times. And that's where you want to spend time in growing your endowment. But after that first couple of million, then the United Way did not set up its own foundation. It just had a fund with a group of business people, financial people who managed the investments and so forth. And it's worked really well in our community.
I think that's a good point, Dan, because the simplest way to do this is just to have the fund held by the United Way.
Right.
But for a variety of reasons, many United Ways don't do that and either create their own foundation or farm some of it out. The other thing I think is important, you don't have to have one fund. As we mentioned throughout this, you can have several options so that you can demonstrate that you're collaborating with the community foundation. And as you're talking to the donor, say, well, what's your preference? Where would you prefer this money to go?
Right.
Christy made a great comment in the chat that just said you've all reinforced the importance of building an endowment to sustain and advance United Way's mission and to extend a donor's legacy no matter where the dollars are managed, which is a really great point.
Yeah, I think we want, we want the distribution. We're less concerned about where the money is held. Community foundations want the money, but they're less concerned about where it's distributed. So there is kind of a synergy there between the two organizations.
I have a question, and this is something that's come up recently by an individual who asked, what happens if you have an endowment and the funds are held at the community foundation or like the Foundation for the Carolinas, and then the organization, like a local United Way, were to go out of business? what happens to that money?
The agreements, my understanding of the agreements that I've seen is then the let's say it's the community foundation, their board would make a decision about where that money would go. My suspicion is in most instances that would either go into their general unrestricted fund, or they would find a like organization and distribute it. But it would be up to the community foundation board based on their own internal policies to make that decision.
And I think that comes up for me thinking about local United Ways that are merging. And, is there an impact there if, 3 United Ways decide they're going to join together? Does that money still benefit the one that merged? Or, is that something that could be written into the agreement before an endowment were started, just to ensure another local United Way would benefit versus it just goes into a general fund?
Well, I'm not an attorney, so I couldn't answer that specific case. I would suspect from just community goodwill that the distribution would continue to the merged organization. I would think that would be a difficult thing for the community foundation not to do. But I know that when they have mergers and there are endowment funds, that involves some kind of legal review.
Anyone else have questions? Or even just thoughts, best practices, things that you want to share?
I sure would like to know how Birmingham got up to $100 million. Dan, what did you do to create that kind of a fund?
Bob, it was in 1991 we started. I misspoke when I said 2001. We had $1.5 million in trust funds in several banks in the community going back to 1942. So in 1991, we said, we're going to start moving on this. And the genius of it was our volunteers, just like you have a team of volunteers working the annual campaign, we had a team of volunteers going out to looking at the largest donors first and working down, a team of volunteers going out thanking those, say, top 10 or top 25 or top 100 for their annual gift, and sharing the dream that we'd like to have that gift perpetuated, or have they ever thought about it, and had the commitment form and asked them to think about it. And it was just making calls, friendly visits to our great donors who had been giving, some of them for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and had never been asked if they would perpetuate the gift. So it just started that way. And our most success was the years that we had lots of volunteers working in making calls in the plan giving area. And I still say it to them, it's people going out, thanking donors for their listening to their stories, planting the seed, and asking them if they would consider endowing their gift at the 25 times the annual gift. And most of the people we found had never been asked. And we had to plant the seed. But people think it's technical stuff and volunteers, and you have to just say, look, it's friendly visiting, thanking people for their annual gift, planting the seed, asking them how they got started, and the money comes. The other finding we had was the more people that endowed, the greater their investment was in our United Way, and their annual giving in many cases, it started to increase as well. So it was really a win-win. Wow. And it's been very exciting. The big jump now is talking about community foundation. Our boards were kind of interrelated quite a bit. And the community foundation was relatively new in the community, but had some very powerful people. And we desired to run a capital campaign for endowment probably 20 years ago. And there was strong opposition to our doing that it would interfere with the community foundation. And so we even put out RFPs to firms to come and help us do it. And so the feedback was strong, and we just backed off and did the low level stuff, just the blocking and tackling. And just last year, for the centennial of the United Way, they started saying we're at about 50 million. Let's get that thing to 100 million. And they're now at 80 million or more. But it wasn't the rocket science. It wasn't the high tech stuff. It was just people going to see people, thanking them, celebrating the success, and inviting them to consider. Some people would tell us, hey, you're late. Colleges have been here, other agencies have been here. Where was United Way all these years? So that's how we're doing it, and they're still doing it. The other thing we did was, and maybe we had the size, United Way, when I went there, we were 16 million. And when we made the proposal on having this endowment effort, I asked the board, we got 100,000 from a donor to get started, and we had a part-time staff person. And so that we could focus exclusively on endowment, we said the staff person will not do anything else other than work the endowment. And then when that money ran out after 3 years, I went to the board and said, here's our results. We had $3 or $4 million after that part-time effort. I said, we need some full-time staff. And they actually approved up to 5 professionals, but I said, we're not ready for that. Let's give us a 200,000 a year from the fund balance. And we started with 1 full-time, then 2 full-time, then 3 full-time people. And I don't think we've gone beyond that number of staff, but they're focused. What I find in local United Ways is they're so busy with the annual campaign that endowment just gets put aside. The pressure is so great if people are trying to do both. Now, in small United Ways, you have to do both. But Birmingham was big enough at 16 million at that time in annual campaign to say, let's look at it. But the pressure of the annual campaign, and I love the annual campaign because it precludes a lot of people working on endowment, which is unfortunate because once you lose Tocqueville gifts and so forth, my goodness, it's hard to replace,
It's a very powerful story. Thank you.
Christy wrote in the chat that Dan and his team are legendary in the United Way system.
Yeah.
Which is really why Dan is our facilitator and so passionate about this work, because he really has had a hand in it. So congratulations.
I thank you.
So it looks like we're about 6 minutes to the hour. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. If there's any other questions that you might have, we're happy to take them. Another thing I want to mention, because we haven't touched on this yet today, although I mentioned it in the chat, United Way Next has 20 volunteer faculty who are willing to serve as mentors for people in the field. So whether you're new to this or you've been around the block a while and you're like, gee, I could benefit from talking to somebody, Ed, John, Roma, Bose, Bob Faraday, Dan Dunne, Eve Powell was on earlier. These are examples of the people who are part of this group of faculty. And for those who aren't here today that might be listening to this, feel free to email me. The email was noted on the slide deck, and I'll be happy to make a connection. That's really the work that we've been investing a lot of our time and energy in this past year. It's going really well. We consistently get referrals from Evelyn Morgner at United Way Worldwide, who is asking us to help take the lead on those inquiries. So if you're reaching out to her, there's a good chance she'll connect you to me, and then we'll go from there. We actually have 20 mentor assignments that have been underway since the beginning of the year. So we're doing a lot of individualized one-to-one conversations about this work. So please reach out if you're interested in that. And then I also want to mention, I do want to say thank you, first of all, to Dan, who's been our facilitator this year. This is our fourth planned giving learning session, and they've been going really well. Thanks to all of you for participating. And also thank Ed, John, and Roma Bose for their presentation today and all that they've done to support Next and all of you as individuals in the network, because they also have been mentoring individuals across the country, which has been great. So the last thing I'll mention is that we have events coming up, and I want to make sure I just draw to your attention a few of the ones that you may not be aware of, but if there's anybody who's ever considered starting a podcast at your local United Way, it's a way to engage donors, community, volunteer board members, anyone. We're offering a podcast incubator part 1 session just to learn more about the actual how do you start a podcast, and that will be on October 11th. If after that session you say, we want to move forward with the podcast, we have a follow-up workshop on November 1st, and it's actually a hands-on session for you to better, understand the commitment you're making if you start one. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion roundtable on October 25th. We have a group of people from the El Paso United Way, led by our board member, Deborah Zulaga, who will talk a bit about the mass shooting that they had in their county. I believe it was 3 years ago, and the role that diversity, equity, and inclusion played. So if that's of interest, be sure to join us. And then the last one I want to promote today would be our next learning session for planned giving is scheduled on November 30th. And that is going to be, the title of that session is Prospect Research for Beginners. So if you're new to this, it's probably a great session for you to consider. And we'll have Karsten Halusa, who is one of our board members, one of our volunteer faculty, who will be leading that session. So we're looking forward to that. We hope that you all consider coming back for that next session. Other than that, I think those are all the updates. Caitlin, anything that I may have missed?
You covered everything. Thank you.
All right, awesome. And I do want to say thanks to Caitlin, because she is the master behind this, manages our technology, works closely with our guest speakers to ensure things happen as they're supposed to. And I shared in the chat with Christy privately that I make my way to Sun Prairie, Wisconsin often. So the next time I'm in Dane County, I'm going to find her and take her out to lunch, and we're going to talk about all things United Way. And to the rest of you that I don't know, Elizabeth and Ellen and Karen, it's great that you stayed on till the end. We're grateful for your time today. And if there's anything we can do to support you along the way, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Let
Great
me
meeting.
see.
Thanks, everybody.
Ed
Good
and
to see
Roma,
everybody.
Caitlin and
Thanks,
Carol.
Dan. Thanks, Ed.